In 1988, Vertigo took a solicitation from a newer writer working on Black Orchid at the time for a revival of a series Jack Kirby had worked on in the mid-70s. Editor Karen Berger took the treatment written by a young Neil Gaiman, a name I made sure I was pronouncing correctly, with the catch that he had to keep the name The Sandman. The rest was up to him. Now, more than 30 years later, that groundbreaking series that helped make Vertigo a comics powerhouse airs in an adaptation on Netflix. But is this series about the King of Sleep, the Lord of Nightmares and Dreams, too woke? No. That's a profoundly stupid question, one you should be embarrassed to have asked. And if you think so, you are an idiot. I'm Dan Umthen, and this is the Doomcast. Comic adaptations. Just like asteroid movies in the late 90s, they have rightfully created their own fatigue. And as much of a fan as I am of comic book movies, not asteroid movies, and as much of a diehard fan I am of comics, I am fatigued by comic media, but The Sandman felt like a real turning point for comic adaptations and a door that's open for more gothic fantasy-style storytelling. And I have to admit that this is a huge blind spot for me. One of the few must-read comics that I'd never actually read. Embarrassing and odd, since I've read almost everything Gaiman has done in prose, down to the books of magic and comics also, but all of his short stories. Love the guy, somehow miss Sandman. Anyway, in the past week, I watched the series and read the first 8 issues. Big shout out to Brad Gilbert, friend of the show, friend of mine, and stand-up comedian, who's a big Sandman fan and wanted to participate in this review. So thanks very much. I appreciate you, Brad. So getting down to brass tacks, The Sandman is, at its core, about the interactions of the mind-blowingly transcendent with the seemingly mundane. It's a chapter of a story of beyond God-level beings called the Endless, the dysfunctional family that is composed of the main character Dream, also known as Morpheus, siblings Death, Destiny, Desire, Despair, Delirium, and Destruction. Now, they existed before the first gods were conceived of, and at the end of all things, Destiny will hand over his book to Death, who will turn off the lights on all of existence as everything is closed down permanently. Our main character, Dream, really isn't a god necessarily of dreams. He is dreams, both pleasant dreams and nightmares, and the stories that result from both of them. And that's what The Sandman is, a reflection on the concept of storytelling itself. The adaptation has very few flaws. In fact, most of the episodes are word for word from the comic, and there's even episodes that I think are individually better than the issue that they were adapted from. Just my opinion. There are others with an awful lot of filler, which still retain the feel of the original comic nonetheless. The most notable and intentional change is the near total divorce of this series from the DC universe. Yes, Sandman took place in the prime DC continuity, such as it was post-Crisis. Some characters, like Joanna Constantine, are obviously subbed for John Constantine, but work perfectly well. Others, like the brief appearance of Wesley Dodds in Sleep of the Just, or the entire Justice League later on with John Dee, are eliminated entirely, as well as Etrigan. Dee's role as Dr. Destiny is also completely ignored. Now this, in my opinion, actually works better and makes the entire series feel a little bit more grounded to a casual non-comic viewer. I love the fact that it is connected to DC. Your average person isn't going to give a shit. It's not the first gothic horror comic that Netflix has succeeded with. Lock and Key is obviously now in its 3rd season. And of course, the choices to alter some of the characters' race and gender works perfectly well, in my opinion, also. The irony of asking if an effectively genderless, transcendent metaphysical being that lords over sleeping people's thoughts is too woke is palpable is no. One, he's a dream, a thing that sleeping people do, and that's the opposite of woke. And also, two, there is a gay relationship depicted in the very first issue. Gay people just exist as full people, full characters in Sandman, without an agenda, without telling you, this is better than that at all, or this needs to, it just exists. Like they do in reality. Some few characters were changed to black people, or black women specifically, as they, of course, also exist. Slight pedantic digression. White liberals and anybody to the left of them need to drop the term woke. It's broke. It used to be great shorthand for the acknowledgement of the interaction and intersection of capital and political power having a direct role in the propagation of racism, sexism, poverty, and homophobia, just an awareness generally. But it's now shorthand to conservatives of non-white queer people merely exist. But they mean that as a pejorative. As with anything, they co-opt and invert popular language. It basically justifies their idea that they can hate those people but call it an agenda and pretend it's a principled political stance. It's not anyway. There might be some valid criticism of Sandman. I've heard plenty. Some of the episodes do feel drawn out to hit their hour mark. They could probably wrap a little bit earlier, and the better part of the last two episodes feels very drawn out for what they are. Some third acty comic bookiness at the very end. There are some characters that maybe don't get quite what they deserve, and some that get a little too much screen time. But the casting is spot on, in my opinion. From Holbrook's Corinthian to Dream, Lucian, Constantine, Burgess, Ethel, Dee, Lucifer, and the rest, all pretty well perfect and flawless casting. They really knocked it out of the park, but Holbrook's Corinthian and Lucifer absolutely stole the show for me, in my opinion. And in regards to casting, comic and friend of the show, Brad Gilbert, not the country musician, wrote the following, which I'm going to read in its entirety because I felt like it was pitch perfect. To every one of you who has issues with the gender or racial choices when it comes to the casting of the Sandman adaptation, I'd like to give you a gift. The door. Sandman is not for you. It's never been for you, and when you exit through that door, please feel free to burn all of the issues that you may have bought, or omnibuses, or brag about it to your followers on Gab, or Truth Social, or wherever. Sandman at its core is about exploring the differences of the living experience in ways that don't just transcend race and gender, but species and planet. Not in a granola and hugs way, but in ways that are sometimes handcrafted to make you uncomfortable. And if you don't want to be uncomfortable, please just find the door. Pretend that Frank Castle doesn't murder cops or that Superman isn't literally an illegal alien. Well, look, I love that because I've touched on both the Frank Castle and the Superman concepts as well. Brad and I are eventually going to do a cooperative podcast style episode prior to the second season. But for now, I just wanted to make sure that I included his thoughts as well because I appreciate him. But he's right. Sandman is a transformative and transcendent series. Arguably wouldn't have modern comics, much less gothic horror and modern fantasy in almost any medium that looks quite the same way without it. Real hard to overstate its importance. And I think that the TV adaptation may be at least as close to groundbreaking. It might not be for everyone. It might not be a perfect adaptation of the comic, but it's as damn close as almost anything that I've seen in any medium, and it blows almost any Marvel streaming series absolutely out of the water. Thanks everybody for watching. I'm going to be at the Funny Bone this weekend with Jake Johan. Give me a shout out if you're in the Des Moines area. Thanks everybody for watching once again. This has been the Doomcast. I'll see you next week.